All right, let's get started. Today we're gonna talk about the Chinese Communist Party and China's World War II, or 抗日战争, the war to resist invasion of Japan, as the Chinese call it. So last time we talked about how the Qing Empire collapsed in 1911. Chinese revolutionaries tried to establish a republic of China, but failed. Instead, China fell into warlord rule. Different warlords are fighting together, fighting with each other. They control the different provinces in China. Sun Yat-sen, the forerunner of the Chinese Revolution, realized that he probably cannot copy a United States and American style of democracy or constitution into China. So after failing many times, he decided that he is going to go to the south to establish his own military base and build a revolutionary army, an army that is loyal to himself. And then they're gonna launch a northern expedition to defeat the warlords in the north until they militarily unified China again. So that's his plan. Last time we talked about how the Soviets tried to export communist revolution, and a Soviet agent, Voitinsky, arrived in China. This happened in the early 1920s. He approached Sun Yat-sen and made an offer to assist him in building this military base and a revolutionary army. But there's a condition for that offer and the Soviet assistance. That is Sun Yat-sen and his Nationalist Party. Nationalist Party has been restructured by Sun Yat-sen to become a sort of a Leninist style of party. Leninism. Let's talk a little bit about Leninism. We know that Karl Marx lived in the 19th century. Karl Marx is this Jewish scholar living in Germany, but later he moved to UK to write. He actually wrote most of his major works in UK. Karl Marx imagined a sort of a pattern of a human history based on something he would call dialectical materialism, or which means Karl Marx believes that human history develops not because of some great man's ideas or plan. Human history develops because of material condition changes. This is something he would call the mode of production, mode of production. Furthermore, in different stages of human history, there's always a class struggle, right? For example, in the ancient Greco-Roman societies, the class struggle was between the slave owners and the slaves. This is according to Karl Marx. And then when it moves on to the medieval period, you have this class struggle between the feudal lords and the serfs, right? And then when it moves on to modern period, when capitalism emerged, you have class struggle between the capitalists or the entrepreneurs versus the industrial workers, the proletarians, the proletarian class. So that's so Karl Marx identified class struggle in each different stages of human society, of human history, and he envisions that someday in the future, the capitalist society and its class struggle will be ended and be replaced by a new society called communist society, in which there is no class struggle. So Karl Marx envisions that industrial workers would unite they would cross the national boundaries and unite, and then they would use revolution to overturn the capitalists and their government, and to establish a new society that is a communist society in which there's no class struggle, there is no private property, everyone is equal to each other, and then the state eventually will disappear, but before it disappears, economic activities will be regulated by planning. So that's some very vague idea. Karl Marx only had some very vague idea about communism. But in 1917, the Russian communists, Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, they launched a revolt in St. Petersburg, and they overturned the Tsarist rule in Russia, and they established the first communist government in history that is called the Soviet Union. This happened in 1917, towards the end of World War I. But Lenin had a little bit different idea about communism than Karl Marx. Lenin believes that, yes, to establish communism, you need industrial workers, but what's more important is to have a vanguard group who will lead the industrial workers, who will become the leaders of the proletarian class. Okay, so who are the vanguard group? The Communist Party. Okay, so Lenin developed Karl Marx's ideas by highlighting the importance of a revolutionary party, that is Communist Party. So the Communist Party members, they don't have to be industrial workers. They can be scholars, they can be intellectuals, they can be professional revolutionaries. They don't have to be workers, industrial workers. Some of them even have a lot of money, but they chose to take communist revolution as their career and profession, and they joined the Leninist style Communist Party and become loyal to it, and they become professional revolutionary to working hard to overturn the current government, the capitalist government. So Leninism really emphasizes on the necessity of the vanguard group to lead the revolution. Okay, and in order for this revolutionary party to be effective, Lenin believes that, and so did Stalin, the party has to be extremely disciplined. It has to be almost like a military group. Okay, it has to have a strict hierarchy. Okay, that means all the members follow the leader unconditionally. And if there's a traitor in the party, then you will physically eliminate them. Okay, so in other words, communist parties are totally different from the kind of parties we understand in the United States, right? It's totally different from Republican Party or Democratic Party. No, totally different. For Republican Party, you can join it today and quit tomorrow. No one is going to punish you, right? But for the communist parties, no, you cannot just come and go that easily. Actually, they require you to take an oath, take a pledge that you will be always loyal to the party. If you betray the party, literally they're gonna come at you. Okay, they're gonna come at you. So it's not that easy to join and to quit the party membership. So in wartime, this kind of a structure makes the communist parties pretty effective, especially at least in Soviet Union and in Chinese Revolution. We see that the better you can organize a party, the more powerful you could be, right? But of course, it could also backfire when you finish the revolution. We're going to talk about that next time. The problem is the problem with the party rule or the party state is that if you're going in the right direction, yes, you seem to be more effective than democratic countries. Democratic countries are always marked by checks and balances, a lot of discussion, a lot of quarrel, lots of disagreement, a lot of consensus, a lot of reconciling of different opinions, right? So it's not that, on surface, it's not that effective. But the problem with the party state Communist Party stated is that if you go in the wrong decision, wrong direction, then your mistakes will be magnified. And no one, since there is no checks and balances within the party, no one is gonna stop the party leader. That's the problem. Okay, so you're gonna directly go to disaster. Okay, so in 1920s, back to China. So when the Soviets arrived in China, they convinced Dr. Sun Yat-sen to have a Leninist style of party. So Sun Yat-sen restructured his nationalist party following the Soviet Union party model. So that means he's gonna be the unconditional leader. Okay, no one within his party can challenge him. Okay, because his goal, Sun Yat-sen's goal, is to build a revolutionary army, right? So the party is gonna be the leader of the army. Once you have a party, well, I mean, Sun Yat-sen is the sole leader of the party, and then the party perfectly controls the army. So this makes sure that the revolutionary army is going to be very different from the armies of the warlords, because the warlords, they have no ideology. They don't have much beliefs, right? They don't have a fixed political beliefs or convictions, right? The warlords are only interested in money, right, and troops and power. But Sun Yat-sen and the like-minded Chinese, they are different. They have this political idea. They have this political vision to either build a republic or to build a communist China, right? They have ideology backing them up. And they have this party structure, which allow them to build a very effective army. For example, in the Revolutionary Army, the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party were building. There is a sort of something like a party commissar in each fighting unit to make sure that no one is gonna surrender without approval, right? Everyone is gonna strictly follow the order, fight to the death. Okay, yeah. If you look at all these communist countries' army, they're in their menu. There is no mention of a surrender condition. Yeah, so they don't allow you to surrender in any condition, under any conditions. Okay, so the Soviets, on one hand, they're providing aids to Sun Yat-sen and his nationalist party. On the other hand, they are building the Chinese Communist Party. 1921, with the help of Soviets, the first Congress was held in Shanghai in 1921. Yeah, actually, just 2 weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party just had its 20th party congress. So I mean, it's almost it's more than 100 years after its creation in 1921. You have the Chinese Communist Party still there, and seemingly implementing an effective rule over China still today. But in 1921, it was just a small club. Okay, these are the party representatives. They came from different provinces. Okay, so on this PowerPoint, you will see the representatives of the first party congress of the Chinese Communist Party, including Mao Zedong, over here, a guy from Hunan province. So these party members, they had their first meeting, and they're basically following rules. They're following orders and directives from Moscow. In 1921, between 1921 and 1925, Moscow's order to the Chinese Communist Party is that all their members are going to join the Nationalist Party led by Sun Yat-sen. So the two parties are going to unite. This is later called the First United Front. So you have a party within party structure, right? Within the Nationalist Party, led by Sun Yat-sen, you have Communist Party. So if you're a Communist Party member, you're by default you're automatically a Nationalist Party member. But if you're a Nationalist Party member, you may not be a communist. You may not be a communist. Okay, so this is the kind of situation in early 1920s. Okay, so in the South, the two parties worked closely with each other. And they received military aids, financial aids from Soviet Union. They were preparing for a northern expedition to defeat the warlords. In 1924, 1925, Sun Yat-sen went to Beijing to negotiate with the warlords, but he died in Beijing. But after he passed away, the northern expedition, the military campaigns are still in preparation. Eventually, in 1927, 1926, the two parties decided that they were ready, so they launched a northern expedition. Okay, so this map shows you the routes of the revolutionary army's advance. Yeah, within the Revolutionary Army, the many military officers are either a Communist Party member or Chinese Communist Party members. Yeah, so the army was led by both parties. The Northern Expedition was pretty successful. Yeah, because the Revolutionary Army was well prepared. They were better equipped, better trained, and most importantly, they're armed with an ideology. They're trying to sort of build a republic in China and bring China towards a bright future. So those the military officers, they're not fighting for money or power. They're fighting for their vision of a new China. So they defeated their warlords on their way. In 1927, the Revolutionary Army already occupied Shanghai here in the lower Yangtze Delta and Nanjing. And also the Hubei provinces, and they're fighting all the way towards north. But when they arrived in Nanjing and Wuhan, the two parties got into disagreement. The problem is the military commander of the Revolutionary Army, Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was a follower of Sun Yat-sen. So after Sun Yat-sen passed away, Chiang Kai-shek pretty much became the #1 military commander of the army. But the government was controlled by another guy, another follower of Sun Yat-sen called Wang Jingwei. We're going to talk about Wang later. So Chiang Kai-shek in 1927, when he occupied Shanghai and Nanjing, he did not want to share the power with the Chinese communists anymore. So he launched a purge to kick out the communists. He arrested the communists within the Nationalist Party. Some of the communists had to quit the Communist Party and join the Nationalist Party. If they don't want to do that, they're in prison, or even worse, they get executed. So that's what Chiang Kai-shek did. And at the same time, the other leader of the Nationalist Party, Wang Jingwei, in Wuhan City, he did a similar thing. He also did a purge to kick out the communists. So almost overnight, the communists, because communists are they're fewer in number and weaker in their power. So they got kicked out from the party. So we call this a split between the two parties. The first united front broke down. Okay, so Chiang Kai-shek, after he purged the communists, he continued the northern expedition until he subdued the warlords in the north, especially a very strong warlord called Zhang Zuolin and Zhang Xueliang in Manchuria. Okay, Chiang Kai-shek did not. He only nominally unified China. Many of the warlords in different provinces, they only nominally surrendered or submitted to Chiang Kai-shek's rule. Chiang Kai-shek established his capital in Nanjing City as the capital of the Republic of China in 1927. So although he's a nominal central government of China, but many provinces in China still ruled by warlords that sort of nominally follow the central government's order. Okay, for example, as we mentioned before, in Manchuria, there is the Zhang family, right? In northern China, Song Zheyuan and other warlords are still ruling there. In Sichuan, there's a guy called Liu Xiang. Yeah, in Shanxi province, there's a warlord called Yan Xishan. They only nominally, follow the central government, but they still maintain their own army. So Chiang Kai-shek only controlled sort of 1/3 of China, and his core base is in Nanjing and Shanghai, the richest area in China. But this already allowed Chiang Kai-shek to tax the local population and gradually sort of modernizing China and making his central government, the government, stronger and stronger between 1927 to 1937, when World War II broke out. So this is what happened with the Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, now to the communists. Mao Zedong. Mao is this young man from Hunan province, and he participated in the first Party Congress in 1921. He joined the Communist Party. So he's a sort of a prestigious party member within the party because he was there at the beginning, right? When the Communist Party joined the Nationalist Party, Mao Zedong also joined the Nationalist Party, and he worked as a secretary to the leaders of the Nationalist Party in Guangzhou. So he worked in Guangzhou. When in 1926 and 1927, when the Northern Expedition was going on, Mao was dispatched to Hunan province, to his hometown, to mobilize the peasants there, because he's very familiar with the peasants. Okay, so in 1927, Mao was in Hunan trying to mobilize the peasants for some kind of revolts against the local warlords. But very soon, he found out that the Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalist Party was very successful. They kicked out the local warlords in many southern provinces, and they tried to purge the communists. So Mao, as a hardcore communist, got kicked out from the Nationalist Party, of course, and then he received a new order from Comintern to launch revolt to overturn the Nationalist Party's rule. So, I mean, previous friends very, very quickly became enemies, became rivals. In 1927, Mao was in Hunan. He tried to launch a revolt and take a major city, but they failed. They tried to follow the Soviet Union approach to revolution. Which means to launch a rebellion in major urban centers and then overturn the government. But they failed because they're too weak militarily. So Mao changed his idea. He led a small army into the mountains. The soldiers are basically all peasants. They are all farmers. They used to be farmers. So Mao is very familiar with them. So in Jiangxi and Hunan, the border between Jiangxi and Hunan, Mao established a military base to recruit poor local peasants into his army. And following the Soviet Union model, the Chinese communists call their army the Red Army because they are communists. They're following the Soviet Union model, right? So Mao's Red Army is growing and growing, okay? And what Mao did in all these communist military bases is that they launched a land reform. The land reform sometimes can be pretty bloody and brutal. That means the Red Army, wherever they go, they would kill the landowners in that area, or at least punish them and take away their land. And then the Red Army would redistribute the land among the poor peasants. So this sounds like a good thing for poor people, right? But actually it's not, because the new government tax the poor peasants very heavily. The poor peasants had to turn in a huge amount of their agricultural production. So in other words, in the eyes of the Chinese Soviet government, The poor peasants, they're basically just employees of the state farm because their land was given by the state, right? So the state, the communist government thought it's right for them to take away a substantial percentage of the peasants' production. In the 1950s and 60s, when the communists, conquered China and established their rule over entire China, they expanded this land reform to entire China. Yeah, the previous landlords all lost their land, and then peasants first got the land, but within several years, the land was taken away again by the state, and then the villages were turned into state farms, and then the peasants are pretty much just like slaves working for the state. Over 90%, over 80% of their agricultural products taken away by the state. So it's not that beautiful as it sounds. Okay, but Mao did expand the military bases in Jiangxi province. Okay, so if you look at this map, these small patches are where communist military bases were built. So they're like these communists are like a Robin Hoods, right? They're gonna rob the rich, and then they say they're gonna share it with the poor. But most importantly, they try to build a strong army. They're warlords themselves, but they're fighting against the local warlords and the Chiang Kai-shek's government at the same time. Okay, yeah. See, in 1935, this is the Red Army. They were provided with firearms by the Soviets. They receive financial aids from the Soviets, just like before. And the Red Army in China, led by the Communist Party, has been expanding. Okay. All right. At the same time, Chiang Kai-shek was fighting against other warlords in the north. This is what happened in the early 1930s. But Chiang Kai-shek is also modernizing his own capital in Nanjing and Shanghai, which is economically most developed areas in China. Okay, in 1934, 1935, Chiang Kai-shek launched several so-called extermination campaigns against the communists, because Chiang Kai-shek wanted to destroy the communists. Right, the communists are here, yeah, in this area, in the southern provinces. In 1935, finally, Chiang Kai-shek mobilized enough troops to attack the communists, and the communists were defeated in the south. So the communists were forced to embark on a so-called long march. So this map will show you in between 1935 to 1936, the communists got kicked out by Chiang Kai-shek from their military bases, and they embarked on a long journey. They're escaping from Chiang Kai-shek's army. They're moving west towards Tibet. This is Tibet. Yeah, the Red Army, they were defeated again and again, until they moved to areas where Chiang Kai-shek had no military control, like Tibetan area, right? And then they crossed the snow mountains, they crossed the swamps, they crossed the grassland, and they moved all the way north to northern China, Shanxi province, to a place called Yan'an, a town called Yan'an. Why Yan'an? Well, the reason is because when the communists were running for their life, at first they did not know where to go. But eventually they learned that there is another small communist military base in Yan'an, and Yan'an is close to Mongolia. In 1930s, Mongolia is a satellite state of Soviet Union. So yeah, there is a Soviet Red Army in Mongolia. So this place is much closer to Soviet Union help, right? So the plan is to establish a new base in Yan'an so that they could receive more military aids, financial aids from Soviet Union because it's closer, right? So that's the idea. So after 1 year of traveling, most of the remaining Red Army troops finally arrived in Yan'an. Okay, and there they try to settle down. During this whole so-called long march, this whole journey from southern China to northern China, Mao Zedong rose to become a commander of the Red Army, and later he became a party leader. So Mao Zedong was actually not appointed by Stalin. He sort of arose to prominence within the party, thanks to his talent in military commandership, and then later as a party organizer. Okay, so this is a picture Mao took in Yan'an. As you can see, the book he read is authored by Stalin. Did you see that? Yeah, if you pay close attention, you'll see that it's a Stalin's portrait on the cover of the book. Yeah, this is actually, I believe this is 联共部党史. This is the party history authored by Stalin. So Mao is learning Stalinism in Yan'an. Actually, in the 1930s, Mao hardly read any original works by Karl Marx, because Karl Marx's work has not been translated into Chinese language for Mao to read. So Mao actually, the kind of communism Mao got exposed to was basically Leninism and Stalinism. I mean, after all, Chinese Communist Party was a younger brother party created by the Comintern, and they receive financial aids, military aids from Moscow consistently. Right? Okay, so now World War II. Let's talk about the origins of World War II. In 1931, the Japanese military officers in Manchuria, they launched an attack on the local Chinese army. In this case, the Zhang family's warlord army. So 1931, we call this a Manchuria incident in 1931. And then within several weeks, the Japanese, they occupied the entire Manchuria and they kicked the Chinese troops out of it. So Zhang Xueliang, the warlord in Manchuria, he was forced to leave his hometown in Manchuria. Why there are Japanese military officers in China? Okay, so this one has to be traced back to the Boxer War in 1900. Remember, in Boxer War, the Qing government in China declared war against 11 foreign powers, including Japan. So when China was defeated, the Japanese got the right to have a standing army in China. And then later, when the Japanese defeated the Russians in Manchuria, remember between 1903 and 1904, there is this war between Japan and the Tsarist Russia. This is called the Russo-Japanese War. Japanese won the war, and as a result, Japan controlled Korea and Manchuria, at least a part of it. Japan controlled the railroads in Manchuria. So in 1931, the Japanese troops that launched an attack on the Chinese troops, they were actually originally deployed there to guard and defend the railroads, because the railroads are Japanese interest, right? So in 1931, just remember, Japanese took entire Manchuria, and that's very, very controversial. Okay, most countries in the world did not recognize Japan's rule in Manchuria. Okay, many Western powers believed this is an invasion. That this is a violation of international law. Okay, we know that after World War I, there is an international organization, a predecessor of United Nations, called the League of Nations. Okay, right after World War I, the League of Nations was established as a sort of a international organization transcending national governments to sort of to hear the disputes among nations, right? So in 1931, Chiang Kai-shek's government, they appealed to the League of Nations. They wanted the League of Nations to hear about this case. Chiang Kai-shek complained about Japan's invasion and occupation of Manchuria. League of Nations launched an investigation, and they sent a mission to Manchuria for an investigation. And the ruling of the investigation, the results of the investigation is that Japan is at fault. So League of Nations made a request to Japan for the Japanese Kwantung Army to withdraw from Manchuria, but Japan disagreed. Japan ignored that request. In response, Japan quit the League of Nations. Okay, so League of Nations has no executive power. Okay, so no one, those invaders or violators of international law did not care about the rulings of the League of Nations. So this is what happened in 1931. And then in 1932, Japan trying to have some, create some kind of legitimacy for its rule in Manchuria. They found the last emperor of China, who was already deposed in 1912, right? The Japanese found the last emperor of China, Puyi, and he was escorted to Manchuria to become emperor for the second time in his life. So in 1932, Manchuria state was created by Japanese, although their emperor was a Manchu, but the last emperor of China was born in Beijing, and it was the first time he go to his ancestors' land in 1932, and there he became emperor again. The Puyi was a puppet, a sort of figurehead in Manchuria. But Chiang Kai-shek realized that Japan certainly has this plan to overtake China. Okay, so Chiang Kai-shek is also preparing for a all-out war, a military conflict against Japan. But Chiang Kai-shek knows that, we're talking about it in the 1930s. Chiang Kai-shek knows China was too weak because China was not industrialized yet. So if a all-out war break out between China and Japan, China is definitely going to lose, right? So Chiang Kai-shek's strategy is to first unify China and then focus on military preparation for the imminent conflict with Japan. So for that purpose, Chiang Kai-shek must defeat all the other political forces domestically first, okay? So that's his plan. So he's going to solve the domestic problem first and then turn against Japan. So when Japan provoked first in Manchuria and then in northern China again and again, but most of the time, Chiang Kai-shek is trying to use a strategy of appeasement. That means that he is trying to avoid a conflict with Japan because he had to defeat all these different rivaling warlords and communists first within China, right? But this plan got messed up in 1936. In 1936, okay, we're going to talk about very quickly an accident. Remember the warlord Zhang Xueliang? His hometown is in Manchuria, right? In 1931, when the Japanese attacked his army, Zhang Xueliang's army, Zhang was too weak. He decided that he's going to give up. So he did not fight against the Japanese very hard. Instead, he just ran away with his troops. So with the many troops, Zhang Xueliang and his army just quit from their military positions, and they rushed into northern China from Manchuria. And then when Zhang Xueliang and his army arrived in northern China, they were redeployed by Chiang Kai-shek to Yan'an to fight against the communists. Okay, so in 1936, 1935, and 1936, when Zhang Xueliang's army was fighting with the communist Red Army, they realized that Zhang Xueliang realized that he's losing his army. Okay, because the Red Army is not that easy to deal with. So eventually he decided that he's gonna make an agreement with the communists without telling Chiang Kai-shek. But he needs a rhetoric. His rhetoric is that, General Zhang Xueliang's rhetoric is that Chinese should unite together against foreign aggression, in this case, Japanese. So he made Zhang Xueliang made a suggestion to Chiang Kai-shek, saying, let's stop the civil war. Let's unite with the communists, and we can fight the Japanese together. But Chiang Kai-shek knows that China was not ready yet. So Chiang Kai-shek confirmed the order to Zhang Xueliang for him to attack the Red Army, but Zhang Xueliang refused. So in late 1936, this photo was taken at the airport of Xi'an City. On that day, Chiang Kai-shek landed. He flew from Nanjing to Xi'an and landed in Xi'an airport, and he talked to General Zhang Xueliang, and the mission, his job, Chiang Kai-shek's intention is to urge Zhang Xueliang in person for him to attack the communists. But several days later, after Chiang Kai-shek landed in Xi'an, because Chiang Kai-shek only brought like 100 personal guards, Zhang Xueliang launched a mutiny. At one night, Zhang Xueliang had his army surrounded the hotel where Chiang Kai-shek lived, and they killed all of the Chiang Kai-shek's personal guards. And Chiang Kai-shek tried to run away, and he broke his ribs when he jumped off the window, and Chiang Kai-shek was trying to hide in the mountain nearby. And then Zhang Xueliang had all his troops search the whole mountain until they found Chiang Kai-shek, the president of China, in 1936, in a cave. So later there is this I don't know how to call it, a pavilion or a structure, a building structure built near the cave where Chiang Kai-shek was arrested or caught, on the mountain near Xi'an. I personally visited that area. Yeah, I saw the small cave where Chiang Kai-shek was hiding until he got put out from that cave. So this incident was later called the Xi'an incident. It is very important because the president of China was arrested by his own general in a mutiny. This is a coup d'état, right? This is a rebellion. So Zhang Xueliang urged Chiang Kai-shek to stop the civil war. They talked for many days until Chiang Kai-shek eventually agreed. So basically, Chiang Kai-shek got a gun pointed against his head, and he agreed that he's going to stop the civil war and turn against the Japanese. But to Chiang Kai-shek's surprise, although he was caught by in the mutiny, but the public opinion in China supported Zhang Xueliang, because a lot of Chinese intellectuals, scholars, and prominent social figures, they overwhelmingly supported Zhang Xueliang's suggestion to Chiang Kai-shek. So although later Chiang Kai-shek was released by Chiang Kai-shek still honored his promise. Okay, he did stop the civil war, and he stopped the attack on communists, which is probably the biggest mistake he would make in his life. Okay, but he did that. So this incident totally saved the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so without this mutiny, the Communist Red Army would have been destroyed by Zhang Xueliang's army, and the remaining communists, they would have to flee towards Mongolia or Soviet Union. They're gonna probably end up in Moscow. But so Zhang Xueliang saved the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so in early 1937, Chiang Kai-shek really made up his mind that he's gonna honor his promise made with a gun pointed against his head. He's gonna stop the civil war. He's gonna turn against the Japanese, no matter his army was ready or not. Actually, his army was not ready. We know that, but he still made that decision. So yeah, so this is the situation right before World War II. Okay, right before World War II. So in 1937, for the second time, the two parties united together. Remember when Sun Yat-sen was there, that was the first united front, when the two parties worked together to prepare for a northern expedition against the warlords in the north. Now, in 1937, the two parties united again. So this is historically called the Second United Front. Okay, the Second United Front was made to prepare China for World War II, for the imminent Japanese invasion. The Japanese are going to invade. We all know that because Japanese already took Manchuria, and they're provoking in the north along the Great Wall. I mean, all Chinese, everybody knows that the Japanese are going to launch an all-out war against China pretty soon. So in 1937, Chiang Kai-shek stopped the Civil War, and he's gonna prepare China for this big war with Japan. Any questions? Any questions? All right, next we're gonna talk about China's World War II. So we're gonna cover China's World War II years from 1937 to 1945. China fought against Japan for 8 years, 8 full years actually. And then right after that, China entered into another civil war between 1946 to 1949 between the communists and the nationalists. So Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, both they were fighting against each other with their armies. Okay, so first let's talk about World War II. Well, if you look at the outbreak of the war between China and Japan, very few people understood that it was the beginning of another world war, right? Because when World War I broke out in Europe between 1914 to 1918, China was barely affected by the war. Actually, World War I was understood by many Chinese not as a world war because China was not there, right? If you look at East Asia, not just East Asia, if you look at the Eastern Hemisphere, there was hardly any war, right? So many Chinese called World War I European War. That's what they called it. And many Japanese also share the same, they also use the same term, European War, the Great European War, to refer to World War I. So this raises the question of, is World War I really a world war, right? When the fighting mainly happened in Europe, right? Not in many other areas in the world. But World War II is truly, in my opinion, the first global war. Although you may argue that in South America there's hardly any fighting, but many Latin American countries got involved in the war in one way or another. But there is no very hard fighting in Latin America. But except for that area, almost most parts in the world got involved. If you think about that, certainly is. We can call World War II a global war, no question. So in 1937, for many Japanese, they did not know that they're actually entering a world war. Okay, the Japanese military had a strange tradition. That is, although the military officers, especially lower-ranking military officers, although they are very loyal to the emperor, but they did not take order all the time from their headquarters in Tokyo. Actually, many military officers overseas, they tend to launch their own military operation on their own without approval or permission from their bosses. See, this is a very strange thing about Japanese. So in 1931, when the local military officers, the Japanese military officers launched the attack on Chinese troops, this military operation was not pre-approved by Tokyo. Actually, Tokyo had no idea about what's going on in the field. Just imagine this. A modern comparison would be, a modern analogy would be, say, years ago, U.S. military force was fighting a war in Afghanistan. Remember, imagine the military commander of a U.S. military force in Afghanistan decided that he's going to attack a province in Pakistan, a nearby country, without approval. from Pentagon. So this is what happened in Manchuria in 1931. Okay, so the local Japanese military officers simply attacked the Chinese without telling their bosses beforehand, and then they only told Tokyo about their achievements later, right? After they kicked the Chinese troops out of Manchuria. Manchuria is a huge land, 6 times larger than the homeland of Japan. So they got a big, right? If you look at Manchuria, I mean, sorry, this map is okay. Oops. Yeah, this is the entire Manchuria. This is 6 times larger than Japan, the home island. So only after the Japanese troops accomplished the mission, they told Tokyo about this. So when the news arrived to Tokyo that local Japanese military officers occupied a huge chunk of land on Earth and kicked the Chinese out, eventually, at first, the prime minister wanted to. The prime minister Inukai. Inukai was the Japanese prime minister in 1931, 1932. He disagreed. He disapproved this military operation. He said, we should give the land back to Chinese. Okay, we should not take the land. It's not right. Okay, we will get a lot of objections and disagreements from the international community. So that's Inukai's major argument. But eventually, after discussion at the council, advising the emperor, most Japanese high officials agreed that they're gonna just accept that. Okay, I mean, it's a big chunk of land. Well, why not? Let's just take it. It's good territory. The emperor also approved later, after the operation succeeded. So after that, Manchuria became basically a colony of Japan since 1931. Between 1931 to the end of World War II in 1945, there were more than 1 million Japanese who migrated from Japanese home island to Manchuria. So they're really the Japanese were really managing Manchuria as a backyard colony. And Manchuria has a lot of population. I mean, although the Chinese troops were kicked out, but there are still many Chinese living there. Millions of Chinese living there, and there are a lot of natural resources, timber, right? Yeah, the mines, all kinds of mines, minerals, right? All kinds of, and also a lot of fertile land. There's a lot of fertile land in Manchuria, great for agriculture. Wheat, they grew wheat, soybeans, right? All kinds of crops. So yeah, so that's Manchuria. So Manchuria became a Japan's colony since 1931. So when the Japanese launched more provokes and attacks on Chinese along the Great Wall, which is this line near today's Beijing, most of the military operations and attacks were not approved by Tokyo. So Tokyo was not ready for an all-out war in 1937. Although the lower ranking military officers, they always want to, take their own initiative by attacking Chinese and take more land, because they know that if they take more land and more cities, more Chinese cities, Tokyo is gonna approve that anyways, right? Just like what happened in Manchuria in 1931. So this sort of encouraged. So Tokyo's attitude and the response encouraged the aggressive military officers in the Japanese Imperial Army to take more and more risk. Yeah, they're willing to take more and more risk until they hit a very hard wall at Pearl Harbor, right? We know that this is what happened later. So in 1937, the local Japanese troops near Beijing, they launched an attack on local Chinese troops, just like before. Okay, this happened on the day of July 7th, near a bridge called Marco Polo Bridge. We only have a vague picture of the fighting there. This is the Marco Polo Bridge. Why is it called a Marco Polo? Remember, we talked about this when we talked about the Mongol Yuan dynasty. Yeah, Marco Polo, the Italian who traveled to China from Italy, right? He mentioned this bridge near Beijing in his travelogue. remember I recommended his travelogue to you to read to answer the question that to answer the question of whether Marco Polo really arrived to China or not, right? Yeah, Marco Polo did mention this bridge, a beautiful bridge with called a Lugo Qiao in Chinese. Is the bridge? It's got more than 100 stone lions on them. You can see several of the lions there, right? So on July 7th, 1937, when the Japanese provoked the Chinese troops, this time Chiang Kai-shek did not back off. He ordered the Chinese troops to fight back hard. So the Chinese fight back. They fought back. But unfortunately, the Chinese did not have tanks. They did not have artillery. They did not have many airplanes. So China was not industrialized yet, right? But Japan was a fully modernized, industrialized power that is willing to challenge the United States a couple of years later, right? So, and Japan at the first stage of the Pacific War almost was winning, right? Many battles or at sea. So Japan was a match for the United States. So China was no match for Japan. Within several weeks, the local troops, Chinese troops, although they fight really hard, they all got defeated. The Japanese took Beijing. At that time, the city was called Beiping and Tianjin city. So Japanese controlled northern China very quickly. But at the same time, in August of 1937, Chiang Kai-shek decided that he's going to attack Japanese first in the city of Shanghai. Again, why were there Japanese troops in Shanghai? Okay, the reason why there are Japanese troops, Marines in Shanghai, is because remember, since the late Qing period, since late 19th century, China has lost a lot of sovereignty and to foreign powers. This is called extraterritoriality. Remember, I told you, we talked about this before, right? Japan got the privilege of extraterritoriality in Shanghai. So Japan carved a big chunk of land as foreign concession, as Japanese concession. The Japanese law and the government was ruling there in part of Shanghai. So this is why there are thousands of Japanese Marines in Shanghai. But in August 1937, Chiang Kai-shek decided that he's going to attack the Japanese foreign concession in Shanghai. Chiang Kai-shek mobilized more than 500,000 of his best troops. His best troops trained in the Wanpo military academy in Guangzhou, and then later in Nanjing. He really mobilized his best troops, and his best troops were equipped with the firearms and equipments purchased from Nazi Germany, because Nazi Germany, ironically, was the only European power that was willing to sell firearms to Chinese. Okay, because since the 1920s, China has been in a constant civil war, right? A series of civil wars. So the European powers, they agreed that no countries are going to sell firearms to Chinese. Okay, so this is an agreement since the 1920s, because China has been in the civil war, except for Nazi Germany. Okay, when Hitler rose to power in the early 1930s, they decided that they don't care about the international convention. They're gonna just make money by selling firearms to Chinese. So ironically, Nazi Germany was the only European country that Chiang Kai-shek could have purchased the firearms from. So Chiang Kai-shek equipped his army with a German-made military equipment. I'm just search. Okay, so here's a picture. Here's a picture of Chiang Kai-shek's army, which is called the Central Army. As you can see, their helmets are German style. Their helmets are all German style, because that's the only country they could buy you helmets from, right? The warlords' army are not called a Central Army. The warlords' army in the north, in Sichuan, they have a much inferior fighting power. Chiang Kai-shek's Central Army not only has the best equipment, the best training, best resources, they also fight the best. But in Shanghai, in August of 1937, Chiang Kai-shek putting almost all his best armies in Shanghai, in the Battle of Shanghai. So millions of troops are fighting in Shanghai in August. The battle lasted for 3 months. Unfortunately, the Japanese mobilized more troops from the home island. So within several weeks, more than 200,000 Japanese troops landed in Shanghai, and they're fighting against Chinese troops, just house by house in Shanghai. And the Japanese Navy also used their battleships to bomb the Chinese troops in Shanghai. So this is really really helped the Japanese to defeat Chiang Kai-shek. So after 3 months of fighting, although the Chinese fight really hard, very bravely, they got defeated. Okay, they got defeated. And then so this is bombing of Shanghai. This is also probably the first area bombing that a large scale that ever happened in human history, right? And this is the Japanese troops on the outskirts of Shanghai. They're in preparation for an attack on the city. So Chiang Kai-shek lost most of his best army, and he had to retreat from Shanghai. In December 1937, the Japanese were pushing towards Nanjing, the capital of China. So let me show you where that is. Okay, here. So Shanghai is here. Shanghai is here. Okay, and Nanjing is here. So yeah, today if you take a high-speed bullet train from Nanjing to Shanghai, it only takes you about less than 2 hours. Although the distance between the two cities is more than 200 miles. 200 miles, yeah. But if you take the high-speed bullet train, which runs close to like 100 miles per hour, it only takes less than 2 hours to arrive the other city. But in 1937, it took the Japanese many weeks to finally push to Nanjing because there are garrisons on the route. But in December, they finally took Nanjing, and then the defense of Nanjing collapsed because Chiang Kai-shek flew away. He flew to Wuhan, and he established a temporary government there, provisional government there. And then later, when Wuhan was taken by the Japanese, Chiang Kai-shek flew to Chongqing over here in Sichuan province near Tibet, and there he commanded the resistance. He still led the resistance against Japanese until 1945. Chiang Kai-shek never surrendered. So that's very, very important, okay? Okay, back to Nanjing. When the Japanese took Nanjing, they launched a massacre of the POWs. There are at least more than 100,000 POWs killed by the Japanese. So at that time, the Japanese did not abide by the Geneva Convention. They didn't care about the human rights of the POWs. So they basically killed all the Chinese POWs that they could get a hold of. And moreover, they're searching for POWs because when Chiang Kai-shek's army was defeated, many of the troops, many of the soldiers couldn't get out of the city because the city is surrounded by very high city walls. So many soldiers couldn't get out of the city, so they just take off their military uniform, abandon their guns, and then just find any civilian house to hide. So this gave the Japanese an excuse to search house by house for the POWs or the astray Chinese soldiers, house by house. Yeah, of course, during the whole process, there's a large-scale raping. A lot of women were raped by the Japanese. So later, this is also called the rape of Nanking. Nanking is just an alternative name for alternative urbanization of the city of Nanjing. It's the same city. So you can call it either the massacre of Nanjing or the rape of Nanking. Same thing. It refers to the 6 weeks of raping and massacre in that city. Yeah. I'll tell you about the story of of an American woman. Those of you who have attended my World War II class may have already heard this story. So bear with me for like 2 minutes. So when the Japanese took the Nanjing city, there was a American woman called Minnie Vautrin. Minnie Vautrin was born in Illinois. She got a master's degree in education at Columbia University. And then she was sent to China as a Christian missionary. Okay, the whole mission was organized by a Christian church headquartered in the United States. So she was sent to Nanjing to serve as the president of the Gingling Women's College, which is a Christian college founded by the American church's money. Okay, so Minnie Vautrin served as the president of this women's college. In 1937, when the Japanese were approaching the city, the U.S. embassy in Nanjing, they sent a message to all U.S. citizens in that city, requesting them to evacuate the city because the situation is dangerous, right? But Minnie Vautrin refused to evacuate. She said, I've never seen a captain abandon a ship that is sinking. I've never seen a mother abandoning children when there's danger. She said, my Chinese students are my children. Well, she actually, I believe she never got married to have children. So she regarded the Chinese students as her children. So she chose to stay in Gingling Women's College, right in Nanjing City. So when Japanese came, she talked to the Japanese occupation authorities, and she, working together with other foreigners in Nanjing, they established a so-called international safety zone right on the college campus. The college campus, I was actually born right pretty near the college campus. So I visited the playgrounds in Gingling Women's College, almost every day. So I'm very familiar with that campus. Today, there is no Gingling Women's College because all U.S. Christian missionaries got kicked out from China in 1950 when the communists conquered China. But so today there is the campus belongs to Nanjing Normal University. So it's not a big campus. The campus is about the size of the UCCS, the same size of our campus. But in 1937, the campus was turned into an international safety zone, and it accommodated thousands of refugees. A lot of refugees flooded into the campus because they want to escape the Japanese raping and massacre, right? Yeah, a lot of them are women. And Minnie Vautrin was helping the Chinese refugees on the campus for 6 weeks. And almost every day, she would guard the entrance to the campus. She would just stand there to block the Japanese soldiers trying to get into the campus. If you look at Minnie Vautrin did leave us a diary. Okay, you can look at his diary. So if you do a Google search, Minnie Vautrin's diary of Nanking or Nanjing, you will find the full text. It's open source. Right? Because many years have passed. So if you look at her diary, you'll find out many poignant, sad stories that she talked about within the weeks when the raping and the massacre happened. For example, she mentioned one day she was there's Japanese trying to get into the campus. They're coming for girls. They want to kidnap girls, college students, and then grab them into their barracks. And then in their barracks, those girls will be gang raped to death. Okay, this happens every day. So Minnie Vautrin is guarding the entrance, but the Japanese came. The Japanese soldiers came. Minnie Vautrin told them that I had an agreement with your commander. Okay, this is an international safety zone. You cannot come in. But the Japanese beat her up. Okay, she was punched and fell down. And then the Japanese took like 40 or 50 young girls to their barracks. None of them returned. All of them probably gang raped to death. So all these sad stories can be found in Minnie Vautrin's diary. So she really did her best to help the Chinese refugees during those weeks of occupation, until until when all this massacre and the raping is over. So after 6 weeks, the Japanese military authority finally decided that they're going to control their troops. Okay, so after they took the capital of China, the Japanese gave their soldiers 6 weeks of free time. Basically, you can loot, you can rape, you can kill, just do whatever you want. Yeah, release your evil nature. I don't know, violent nature. But after 6 weeks, they put on a leash on their soldiers. So peace and order was restored after 6 weeks. Okay, but how many people got killed during that 6 weeks? We don't know. It's very controversial. The number ranges from 100,000 at least. I would say at least 100,000, because we know that that's how many POWs the Japanese killed, to 300,000. Yeah, the Chinese Communist Party today is claiming that there were 300,000 troops. 300,000 civilians killed in the massacre. But that's also very controversial. So the actual number probably cannot be verified, can never be verified, because we don't have reliable data to help us. But certainly there's a lot of atrocities, war atrocities that happened in that city. The large scale raping in Nanjing was so notorious. It was reported by many foreign observers and reporters. So the Japanese government is widely criticized for not controlling their soldiers in Nanjing for the raping. So after the rape of Nanking, the Japanese government, they learned a lesson. So the lesson is that they're gonna control, they have to manage the sexual desire of their troops. So after Nanking, the Japanese invented a system called a comfort women system. This is a direct result of the raping, large-scale raping in Nanjing. The comfort women system involves recruiting Japanese young women as sex slaves to serve in the army, wherever the Japanese Imperial Army goes, okay, during World War II, okay? And then later, the comfort women system expanded to recruit Korean women, Taiwanese women, and the kidnapping Chinese women to serve in the army. For the Japanese women, they were not told the truth. Okay, when they were recruited, they were not told the truth. They were told that they're gonna serve in the front as cooks, as nurses, as assistants. But when they finally got there, they know that they're gang raped dozens of times each day. Okay, so it's absolutely, they're sex slaves. It's absolutely crime. This is totally a war crime. Okay, so after the war, the comfort women became a very difficult issue in East Asia, because Koreans, Chinese, Taiwanese, they asked the Japanese government to apologize. Well, eventually the Japanese government did apologize, but only when decades have passed, and there's hardly any compensation made to those comfort women who were cheated, who were lied to, and forced to serve in the Imperial Army as sex slaves. So this is a very, very ugly story of World War II. Okay, what else? Minnie Vautrin, yes, Minnie Vautrin. So Minnie Vautrin saved, I don't know, at least thousands of lives of Chinese refugees. So she's remembered today. So if you go to the campus of the college she served in, you will find a bronze statue of a Minnie Vautrin there. And although Minnie Vautrin is a Christian missionary, but she is remembered by local Chinese as the living Buddha, because most Chinese are Buddhists, right? So a Christian missionary was remembered as Buddha, as a Buddha in China. So the lesson of this story is that, you know, what religion you believe in really doesn't matter. What matters is that if you do good things, right, you will be remembered. But unfortunately, good things did not happen to Minnie Vautrin afterwards. She witnessed so much war, crimes, and atrocities. She couldn't take it anymore. So eventually she returned back to Illinois, her hometown, and there she suffered depression. I think she suffered some pretty serious mental problem, suffering guilt and shame, perhaps. So she committed suicide, very unfortunately. So she did not see the victory of the Allies in 1945. So it's a very sad story. All right. I'm not going to show you all the graphic pictures of all these war atrocities in Nanjing. Okay, we're gonna skip that. Okay, in my World War II class, I did show you some of the I did show students some of the graphic photos, like a beheading, like a burying alive. Yeah, there are many Chinese POWs buried alive. Yeah. And there was also a killing race, a famous killing race, infamous killing race, where two Japanese captains, they had this race for killing. One day they just come out on the street, to the street of Nanjing, and each of them holding a samurai's katana, a samurai sword, and they're competing with each other to see who is going to kill more innocent civilians on the street by the end of the day. So by the end of the day, one person said, I killed 105. But the other one laughed, saying, I beat you by one more. Okay, so two of them in one day killed more than 200 innocent Chinese civilians. So, and this story was published by Japanese military newspaper at the time. So this is why we got the evidence. So after the war, both captains are arrested and they're sentenced to death in Nanjing and executed in Nanjing. So there are quite a few that kind of war atrocity stories in World War II. So World War II was really fought in China in a pretty cruel and brutal way, all right, so by 1938, the Japanese have occupied entire Manchuria and most of eastern China, okay, and most of the coastal cities. So if you look at this map, all these pink areas are occupied by Japanese, okay? And Japanese also occupied not just Shanghai, Nanjing, Beijing, Tianjin, also Wuhan and Guangzhou, all these major Chinese cities. The Chiang Kai-shek's government was hiding in Chongqing, protected by the mountains and the Yangtze River. Because for the Japanese to reach Chongqing, the capital of the wartime capital of Chiang Kai-shek, the Japanese Navy will have to sail upstream through Yangtze River, and they have to pass the so-called three gorges, the three gorges on the Yangtze River, which is pretty difficult to get through. Okay, today there's a water dam in the three gorges in Sichuan, and those water and that water dam is the largest water dam ever built by any humankind in the world. But in World War II, during World War II, the Japanese couldn't reach Chongqing city, so that saved Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek never surrendered. As we said before, this is super important. Why so? Because imagine that. If China had surrendered within weeks after the war broke out, like the French did in 1940, the French surrendered to the Germans, right? After 6 weeks of fighting. Then China could have been turning to the backyard of Japan, just like France served as the backyard of Germany, of Nazi Germany. In that case, Japan could have mobilized all the manpower, the natural resources, everything in China towards the Pacific War. Okay, in that case, imagine how many American soldiers would have died. But this did not happen. Okay, Chiang Kai-shek never surrendered, although he was defeated again and again and again. But he is trying to use space to trade for time, just like the Soviets did in the first stage of World War II. They never surrendered. Okay, they're losing territory, they're losing land, they're being defeated, but they never surrendered. As a result, throughout the 8 years of World War II in East Asia, Japan had to maintain more than 1 million troops in China because China never surrendered. So the fighting is literally going on every day, right? If China had surrendered, then the Japanese could have moved their 1 million troops to Southeast Asia, to the Pacific Islands, to fight against the Americans after Pearl Harbor. So in my opinion, this is China's contribution to the war, which has been underestimated. It has been seriously underestimated. Yeah, there's a good book called The Forgotten Ally, which is the textbook we use in my World War II class. Well, China as an ally of the United States was only forgotten by Americans, right, during Cold War. right? Because during Cold War, China was turned communist, and you don't want to during Cold War when you look back at World War II, you don't want to sort of appraise your current enemy, right? Which is the communists. So this is why China's role as an ally to the United States was forgotten, was hardly mentioned in during the Cold War. Okay, but now we are picking it up. Okay, so since 1938, the war in China came to a stalemate, impasse. Okay, it's a tie. The Japanese, China was too big for Japan to have an effective rule, right? So Japanese troops can only effectively occupy the major cities and the railroads connecting the major cities. For the countryside, they were controlled by these guys. Okay, look at this picture. These are the militia. Okay, the Chinese militia, guerrilla. They were the guerrilla fighting against Japanese constantly throughout World War II. Some of the guerrilla groups were led by the communists. Some of them led by the nationalists. But either way, they never surrendered. They fought really hard. And this is the bombing of Chongqing. The Japanese couldn't get Chiang Kai-shek to surrender, so they bombed the city again and again and again. Yeah, thousands of people died in each air raid, And then in countryside, the Japanese troops also launched a so-called 3-all policy. That means if there is any resistance discovered in any of the villages, they gonna kill all, take all, and burn all. So they're gonna destroy everything to crack down any resistance. Okay, Pearl Harbor. So in my opinion, World War II, China probably would not have been able to win World War II without United States. Yeah, this is quite clear. Okay, China, if Japan had not provoked the United States, instead, if Japan just managed its own occupation of Eastern China and Manchuria, they could have continued their rule of Chinese territories, right? But in 1940, when World War II was being fought hard in Europe, Japan saw an opportunity. Okay, in 1940, we know that Britain and France were defeated by Nazi Germany. France surrendered after 6 weeks of fighting, and then after that, Japan took the advantage of France because France surrendered. Right? Remember, Japan. Let me find a map to show you the situation. Okay, good map to show you. Unfortunately, no. So you're gonna have to just picture the map of Southeast Asia in your mind. Okay, yeah, to this map. So Southeast Asia, okay, is out of the map. In 1940, remember the three Southeast Asian countries, including Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, they have been taken by France, right? During the 1880s, right? After the Sino-French War, China lost these countries to France. But now in 1940, when France surrendered, Japan sent army to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Okay, because the Japanese identified or discovered a weakness of France, so they took advantage of that. So this made Japan the dominant power in not just Eastern China, but also in Southeast Asia. And this made the United States very nervous. Okay, remember, United States policy towards East Asia is the so-called open door policy. United States is not willing to see any foreign power dominating China or Southeast Asia. Instead, United States wanted to see an open market in China, open to all foreign powers to do business. Okay, that's in United States' interest. But now Japan is controlling too much. Japan is taking too much. So in 1940, eventually, United States sent a message to Japan. The message is that you're gonna have to withdraw from Southeast Asia, from China. Okay, otherwise there will be a boycott. Okay, there will be sanction against you. Actually, there is a oil sanction. That means no oil is gonna be transported into Japanese home islands. But look at Japan. Japan is an island country. You know, when is maritime transportation of oil, energy, and other natural resources are cut off, that's like his being strangled, right? So Japan had to deal with this sanction or embargo, the oil embargo. So this is the origin for Pearl Harbor. Okay, United States is putting on this oil embargo against Japan and sanctions. And Japan tried to get out of the embargo, and the Japanese decided that the only way for them to remove the embargo is to destroy the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The origin of the Pacific War certainly lies in China and Southeast Asia. Okay, so after Pearl Harbor, a lot of aids were sent to China, thanks to the land lease implemented by FDR, right? But most of the land lease funding or money or aids went to Europe. China got less than 5% of all the financial military aids the United States shared with the allies. Okay, two things I want to mention. One is the Flying Tigers. The Flying Tigers are American pilots who, even before Pearl Harbor, they already got trained to fight in China. Okay, Chiang Kai-shek's Air Force was destroyed within the first year of the war. So by 1938, China already lost its Air Force. Okay, entirely Air Force was lost. So in 1940, before Pearl Harbor, Chiang Kai-shek he found a retired general who served in the U.S. Air Force called Claire Chennault. So General Chennault helped Chiang Kai-shek to build a mercenary sort of in Air Force by hiring retired pilots, American pilots, and they also transported U.S. Airplanes through India to China. So even before Pearl Harbor, there were American pilots fighting on the Chinese side already. But of course, after Pearl Harbor, these pilots were officially recruited into the U.S. Air Force fighting in China. And in their air base in near Chengdu and near Kunming, the local Chinese people never see the kind of a shark's face that the Americans painted on their airplane. The Chinese thought they're tigers. The Chinese called them Flying Tigers. This is where the name Flying Tiger is from. It's actually a mistake, okay? But those American pilots, they like that name, so they call themselves Flying Tigers. During the whole war, the Flying Tigers are fighting in the air of China from late 1940, all the way to 1945. And General Chennault, a brilliant general, invented a lot of tactics, very effective tactics against the Japanese fighters. The Type 0 fighter. The Type 0 is the main Japanese airplanes, but the US P-40, P-41 airplanes are really beating up the Japanese airplanes, and the win loss ratio on the American side is 10-1. That means when the Flying Tigers shot down 10 Japanese airplanes. The Americans only lost 1. So that's a pretty good achievements. And the second thing I want to talk about is the hump. Okay, so we know that in 1941, 1942, even when the Americans wanted to help the Chinese, they found out that the maritime route to transport firearms and equipments to Chinese port cities, they were all blocked by Japanese. Okay, so because all the coastal cities were taken by Japanese, so there's no way to get into China. Okay, the only way to transport supplies to China is from India, and then you fly over the highest mountain in the world, which is the Himalayan mountains, right? We know that Mount Everest is on the Himalayan mountains, the highest mountain in the world. It's very difficult because the average, the mountains, the altitude of the mountains are I don't know, it's like 6,000 meters over the sea, 6,000 meters, 18,000 feet over the sea. That's how high those mountains are. So American pilots operating airplanes, transporting supplies to Chengdu, they would have to fly over those high mountains. And more than 1,000 airplanes lost on the route. This route, since they had to cross the highest mountain, it's called the hump. The hump. Yeah. So many American and Chinese pilots lost their lives through the hump route that the wreck of the airplanes are so many that in a sunny day, the pilots flying the airplanes, they don't need navigation. They could just spot the reflection of sunlight of those wreck, of the airplane wreck. So just follow the airplane wreck, you would get to your destination. That's how many airplanes the airlines have lost along the hump. Yeah. And also Doolittle raids. We know that right after Pearl Harbor, the Americans arranged Doolittle raids to bomb Tokyo. Just to the bombing itself did not create a lot of destruction, but Americans simply wanted to send a message that we are determined to beat you. We're determined to have victory, right? But the problem is when the bombers took off from U.S. aircraft carrier, and then after they dropped bombs in Japan, they wouldn't have enough fuel to fly back to the aircraft carrier, because the aircraft carrier will have to return very quickly back to Pearl Harbor, right? Otherwise, they might be targeted by Japanese submarines. So the bombers, so dozens of bombers that have dropped bombs in Japan, the only route for them to get out of Japan is to fly to China. So the Doolittle raids and the pilots, American pilots, all of them flew to China, and they had a forced landing near eastern in China's eastern provinces, especially Zhejiang province here, right? The Japanese know about this. Okay, they know that those U.S. bombers landed in China. So the Chinese local fighters, the guerrilla fighters, they helped the surviving American pilots and transported them eventually back to safety. But the Japanese then, sort of try to get their revenge by killing innocent Chinese villagers in Zhejiang province. No matter if you have helped Americans or not, yeah, more than 100,000 villagers were killed for the suspicion of helping Americans in the Zhejiang province. So this is another sad story about the Doolittle raids. Okay, long story short. After Pearl Harbor, General Joseph Stilwell, an American general who have participated in World War I, was sent to China, and Stilwell was appointed as the highest commander of Allied troops in the China-Burma theater. Okay, but very quickly Stilwell got into a conflict with Chiang Kai-shek. These two just simply don't get along. Stilwell commanded several battles and campaigns in Southeast Asia, This is called the Burma campaign. There are two Burma campaigns ranging from 1941, 42, all the way extending to 1944. 1944, yeah. At first, the Allies were defeated in Burma. Still did not do a very good job. And then with more U.S. supplies supplied to the Chinese troops fighting in Burma and India, the Allies returned. And eventually in 1944, they defeated the Japanese in Burma. And they guarded India, because Japanese original plan is to not only control entire Southeast Asia, including Burma, but also to attack India. And they were hoping to maybe meet with the Nazi armies somewhere in India or in Mesopotamia, perhaps, in the Middle East, but it did not happen, okay? During the whole World War II, there is no coordinated or orchestrated military operations by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. So although these two countries are nominally allies, but they did not really help each other. Think about that, right? I mean, Italy, fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, they certainly helped each other. They were clearly allies, right? They sent allied troops fighting in North Africa, right? But for Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany, there was no coordinated military operation. Yeah? They could have done this, actually. In retrospect, in Stalingrad, 1942, when Nazi troops were fighting hard with the Soviet Red Army, if at that moment the Japanese sent troops to attack Siberia, that means to basically to stab at the back of the Soviet Union. In that case, Soviet Union could have collapsed. The actual power, the Axis powers could have won the war. That's a horrible, possibility, right? But it could have happened in history. Actually, in 1942, there was Japanese politicians. There were Japanese politicians suggesting that Japan should help Nazi Germany to attack Soviet Union together without provoking the United States. But think about that. In 1941 and 1942, if a Japanese imperial government made the decision not to provoke the United States, but instead to help Hitler to attack Soviet Union, then Soviet Union would have been doomed, right? The Battle of Stalingrad would have been totally different. Because at Stalingrad, Soviet Union mobilized their last divisions from Far East, from Siberia. So there is no troops in Siberia. If Japan is gonna attack Soviet Union, then it could have really take down Soviet Union. And if Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan decided that they are not gonna declare war against the United States, that means if there was no Pearl Harbor, then the result of World War II would have been very different. Okay, so it's a horrible, horrible picture, but it's possible. So history is not always doomed. Okay, history is conditioned by a series of contingencies, a lot of contingencies and incidents and surprises. Nothing is inevitable. Okay, the victory of the Allies in World War II, in my opinion, was not doomed. If the United States, if there was no Pearl Harbor, think about that. FDR already promised the people in the United States that he's not gonna participate in another world war to risk the lives of the American young men, because a lot of American young men lost their lives in World War I, right? This is sort of a traumatized American mentality. Before Pearl Harbor, most Americans did not want to go to war, and they had their presidents promise that they're not gonna get into another war. So if Japan had not made that decision to attack Pearl Harbor, no, Pacific War would not have happened. Okay, it would be just the war in China. It would be just a war in Europe. Okay, so Japan's decision really changed the course of the history. All right, so long story short, eventually Japan was defeated. We all know the story, so we're gonna skip the details. Okay, what I'm gonna talk about is the two parties in China. Okay, in 1944 and 1945, the situation was very clear that Japan is gonna be defeated. It's just a matter of time. Okay, so in 1944 and 1945, both parties in China, the Communist Party and the Nationalist Party, although nominally they're still in the united front, they're still working together, but each party was preparing for civil war. Okay, each party knew that once Japan is defeated, the Japanese are gonna withdraw from China, and then in that case, after that, the two parties are gonna have a showdown. They're gonna have a civil war to see who is the future master, who is the future owner of China. Okay, so in 1944 and 45, Mao consolidated his rule of the Communist Party. Okay, in 1945, Mao launched a series of so-called rectification campaigns, basically to purge, to kick out, or to suppress those who are not loyal to him. It's a power struggle. It's a power struggle. So Mao, using a series of purges and movements, he consolidated his power within the party. He became the #1 leader of the party. No one can challenge his power. No one can challenge. Okay. And on the other hand, Chiang Kai-shek became more and more corrupt because he lost his best army in Shanghai in 1937. And then he had to sort of rely on the warlords' army to a certain degree to fight the Japanese. And that was not very effective. In 1944, the Japanese launched the very last offensive. It's called Ichigo Operation. The Japanese fought all the way from Henan province in central China, in Central Plain, all the way down to Vietnam. Okay, and the Chinese army was just breaking down. The Japanese is like a hot knife cutting butter, crushing the Chinese troops along the way. So this made FDR believe that Chiang Kai-shek's government was really disappointing. It was probably not the government that the United States could rely on to build a post-war new international order. Okay, so in 1945, August, Japan declares unconditional surrender. Well, it's called unconditional surrender, but it's actually conditioned, right? Because Japan was able to maintain their emperor. Because a lot of people thought it is a question whether the Japanese emperor should be responsible for some war crimes, because he signed all the documents, right? He signed all the orders, including Pearl Harbor, including the attack of Nanking, right? All these, and perhaps Camp for Women, I don't know. He must have at least tacitly approved many of the campaigns and military operations. So the emperor, should the emperor sort of take some responsibility of the war crimes? It's a question. It's a question. Okay, but anyway, after Japan surrendered, General Douglas MacArthur, the commander of U.S. troops in Japan, and the boss of the occupation of Japan, MacArthur decided that he's gonna remove the emperor, Japanese emperor, from the trial. So the emperor was totally free. The Tokyo Tribunal or Tokyo trials sentenced a couple of Class A Japanese war criminals to death, including the military general in charge of, say, the attack of Singapore, including the commander in charge of the attack of Nanking. Right? All these generals are categorized as Class A war criminals, and they were sentenced to death. But there are like 30 of them, and some more Japanese generals were sentenced to prison. But beyond that, the Japanese government maintained its old structure. Okay, and the emperor is still there. So it became sort of so Imperial Japan after the war became a country with an emperor, but not an empire. So Japanese emperor is an emperor without an empire. Okay, right? So this is kind of a weird situation up to today. Okay, back to China. In 1944, this picture shows an American military observation group visiting Yan'an, and Americans talked to Mao all right? And then Mao said to Americans that he wanted to visit Washington, D.C. He wanted to talk to FDR and perhaps to request some military aids directly from Washington, D.C. So this shows that at least at a certain point of the war, the Communist Party was not against Americans. Actually, they were allies. They were allies. Even the communists were allies of Americans, right? But FDR and his government, State Department, rejected that request. So eventually, they refused to deal with Mao directly. Instead, U.S. government, the federal government, chose to deal with Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government as the only legitimate government in China. So in 1945, when the war, when World War II ended, United States wanted to encourage a coalition between the two parties. Americans wanted to see a united government, including both parties. I mean, in retrospect, we know how naive that idea is, right? I mean, these two parties have been fight for life for decades before the war. They're not gonna unite and drop down their guns just for Americans, right? But in 1945, in October, this American representative, Mr. Hurley, did arrive in China, and he, as a guarantee, he provided a guarantee to Mao and encouraged Mao to visit Chongqing to talk to Chiang Kai-shek directly. So, and Mr. Hurley personally provide a guarantee to Mao. It says, if you visit Chongqing and talk to Chiang Kai-shek, you will not be killed, okay? You will not be arrested. I guarantee, I mean, on behalf of the US government, federal government, I guarantee your safety. I guarantee the safety of your life. So this, with the American guarantee, Mao arrived in Chongqing. And there, he talked to Chiang Kai-shek, 1945. Okay, so this photo is taken in 1945. Mao is here, Chiang Kai-shek is here. And Mr. Hurley, the representative of the US president, is standing in the middle, trying to unite the two parties and trying to reach a peace and order in China. I mean, it's certainly good intention, but it's naive. Both parties, we know, I mean, from what happened later, we know that at that moment, none of the parties were sincerely interested in the truce or in a united government. They were just playing the game for Americans. Yeah. Chiang Kai-shek left us a very detailed diary, from like when he was very young all the way to his last years. So if you look at his diary, which is preserved at the Hoover Center at Stanford University today, you'll find out that in 1945, when Chiang Kai-shek was talking to Mao, Chiang Kai-shek wrote down in his diary, he says, Mao is a bad guy. He's not to be trusted. He's not trustworthy. I'm not going to trust him. So neither side trust each other. So once Mr. Hurley returned back to the United States, Civil War broke out. Okay. So we're running out of time. So we don't have a lot of time talking about the Civil War. The Civil War was won by the communists for a series of reasons. There are the two reasons I want to mention. Okay, just to make complicated things simple. The first thing is that in the last month of World War II, the Japanese still had more than 700,000 troops in Manchuria. Okay, and Manchuria since 1931 to 1945. This is 14 years. Japan spent 14 years to industrialize Manchuria, to turn it into a backyard. Okay, you know, even when Japan was bombed by atomic bombs, there are still suggestions in Tokyo to relocate Japan's capital from the Honshu Island to Manchuria, so that the Japanese could keep on fighting, because Manchuria is their backyard and it has a lot of fertile land. It's 6 times larger, right? So the suggestion is that they're gonna move the imperial government from Tokyo to Manchuria and keep on fighting and lure the American troops to land in China and then have a final battle, decisive final battle. So because when Japan surrendered in August 1945, there's still like millions, more than 4 million, 5 million Japanese troops that has not been disarmed. So the surrender of Japan is really a strange one. The surrender of Japan marked the first time a major power was brought down to surrender purely by air raids. With the millions of troops that still have full fighting power in China, in Southeast Asia, and in Japan homeland. Think about that. It's very strange. I mean, compared to Germany, Nazi Germany was totally destroyed. Their military capabilities are by and large destroyed by allies, by Red Army on the East Front and by the allies on the West Front. But look at Japan. Even in August of 1945, there's still like more than 5 million troops that are not disarmed. So the Japanese had a good reason to argue that they could relocate their capital from Tokyo to Manchuria to keep on fighting, right? So atomic bombs probably did not have that much effect on Japan's surrender as Americans thought, okay? Instead, some other historians argue that the reason Japan surrendered is not because of atomic bombs, but because of 2 days after the dropping of atomic bombs, Soviet Red Army invaded Manchuria, okay? This is 3 months after the ending of World War II in the European theater. So Stalin was able to mobilize millions of troops from Europe to Manchuria, to Far East. And then 2 days after atomic bomb, the Red Army crossed the borderland and they invaded Japan. The Soviets actually violated a non-aggression pact they signed with the Japanese, in 1941. Yeah, in 1941. So they actually violated that pact. So Japan was attacked with a caught unguarded, with a surprise. So the crushing of Japanese Kwantung Army in Manchuria by Soviet Red Army is the last blow to Japan's fighting mentality. That really crashed Japan's fighting spirit. And only after that, we know that the Red Army occupied entire Manchuria only in several weeks. So in August 15, eventually the emperor realized that there's no hope for fighting when they lost Manchuria. Okay, so they declared a surrender. Okay, so the story related to China is that when the Soviets controlled Manchuria, they disarmed the Imperial Japanese troops there. The Kwantung Army was disarmed, and the Kwantung Army was asked to leave all their weapons, all their artillery, tanks, rifles, machine guns, everything in Manchuria. And then the Soviets handed over most of the weapon to the communists because they're on the one side, right? So this is how Mao and his army got really expanded and it got really strengthened in Manchuria. So this happened in 1948, 1949. Okay, happened in 1947 already. 1947, 1948, the Chinese Communist Party members who arrived in Manchuria, they worked with the Soviets because they're both communists, right? And then they received all these weapons left by the Japanese. Not only weapons, they also forced more than 20,000 surrendered Japanese military officers to join the Chinese Communist Army. Chinese Communist Army renamed their name from Red Army to People's Liberation Army, which is a name for Chinese military force even today. Okay, so this happened in 1946, 47. All right, so that's the first reason why the communists won the war. They got a lot of advanced weapon from Japan through the hands of Soviet Red Army. But instead, in comparison, Chiang Kai-shek did not get enough weapon for the Civil War. Because President Truman did not want to help Chiang Kai-shek because in the eyes of Truman, Chiang Kai-shek is just a very corrupt, incompetent dictator, right? Why would Americans support such kind of dictator? He's not a fan of democracy at all. I mean, neither Chinese Communist Party nor the Nationalist Party are supporters of a democracy. I mean, both parties are Leninist to a certain degree, right? So President Truman did not want to help Chiang Kai-shek that much. So this is why if you look at Chiang Kai-shek's diary, Chiang Kai-shek hated Americans more than he did he hated communists. Chiang Kai-shek believed that the lack of support from Americans is the main reason he lost the Civil War. So that's the one reason. So there was 3 major campaigns in the Civil War. First one broke out in Manchuria. And with the Japanese weapon, Mao's Communist Army defeated Chiang Kai-shek in Manchuria in 1948. And then next year, 2 other campaigns broke out in northern China and in the Xuzhou area and in the Beijing area. And Chiang Kai-shek lost both campaigns, and he lost millions of troops. Chiang Kai-shek also lost his home front. Yeah, in order to support the war, Chiang Kai-shek used colossal inflation to finance his war, and this turned out to be disastrous. Okay, see, this is the bills. Excuse me. This is the bills Chiang Kai-shek printed with the Sun Yat-sen's portrait on those bills, right? So the inflation is so much that the prices are changing every day. And in order to buy a whole bunch of, say, toilet paper, you're gonna have to bring a bigger bunch of paper currency to buy the smaller bunch of toilet paper, of toilet tissue. So this is how terrible the inflation has grown. So this is another mistake that Chiang Kai-shek has made. So all these things working together, resulting in the loss of civil war on Chiang Kai-shek's side. So in April 1949, Chiang Kai-shek lost his capital. Okay, and then the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, also took Shanghai, they took Beijing earlier, and eventually they took entire mainland China. Chiang Kai-shek's remaining army and Chiang Kai-shek himself had to flee to Taiwan in 1949. They lost the mainland China, and in Taiwan, the Nationalist Party they ruled under Chiang Kai-shek until mid-1970s, and then after that, Chiang Kai-shek's son Jiang Jingguo became the president. And then when Jiang Jingguo was dying, he brought democracy into Taiwan. So Jiang Jingguo really was a great man, was a great hero in East Asia by ending dictatorship and bringing democracy. So he's basically giving out power by himself. So you need a lot of courage and a vision for someone like Jiang Jingguo to do such a great thing. So today Taiwan is a democratic country, okay? But the Nationalist Party is still there. It's still there. You know, every time when there's a presidential campaign election, the Nationalist Party is still trying to win the presidency. All right. So that's Taiwan. In mainland China, in October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong decided that he's going to create a new government that is called the People's Republic of China. And they decided they're going to have the capital in Beijing instead of Nanjing. They did not like Nanjing. They like Beijing. So they had Beijing as the capital. And very quickly, the Communist Party initiated a whole series of new policies. Like, for example, in terms of foreign policy, they sided with the Soviet Union. They're going to turn against the United States. So allies became rivals in 1949. Okay, Americans sort of lost to China. So this stirred up a debate in America, right? At the State Department and the Congress, people are asking, who lost China? That's the question they asked in 1950. They said, China was our best ally in World War II. But how come now we won World War II, but we lost China? What happened there, right? There got to be something wrong with our policies, right? So the Americans are debating with themselves to find out the answer. Anyway, okay, back to mainland China. With the PRC created, a new series of communist policies are going to be carried out. Okay, and we're going to talk about these next time. All right, any questions?